Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. Get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into a true internet saga. It's a story packed with drama, big money, and a sudden twist that nobody really saw coming. We're plunging into the thrilling, sometimes unbelievable world of online poker, and we're zeroing in on one specific day. A day the internet pretty much held its collective breath. Black Friday.
That's right. And you might think you know poker, but this is different. It's a tale of a digital frontier, really. Fortunes were made with just a click, and then almost in an instant, the entire game changed. We've sifted through a stack of material, legal documents, news reports, insider accounts to get to the fascinating core of what actually happened.
Picture this. It's the early 2000s. The internet is just buzzing, exploding, really. And right there with it, this new entertainment phenomenon takes off: online poker. It wasn't just a game, was it? It felt more like a global gathering place, a virtual arena where millions, literally millions from everywhere, met up at the digital felt.
Absolutely. And a huge part of what lit the fuse, something many of you listening probably remember, was poker suddenly hitting primetime TV. Suddenly, the World Series of Poker wasn't just this niche thing in Vegas. No, it was beamed into living rooms everywhere. People got hooked. They saw the strategy, the tension.
The big money.
Right, the chance to win big. And a lot of people thought, hey, I could do that. I want a piece of that action. And the numbers, well, they tell the story pretty clearly. Between 2003 and 2006, the main event at the World Series, it went from about 800 players
800.
to nearly 9,000, almost 9,000 participants.
Yeah.
That's just a massive surge in interest.
It's an absolute explosion, no other word for it. And with that kind of, wildfire growth, this huge online marketplace just sprang up. Giants emerged from the digital deck, names like PokerStars, Full Tilt Poker, and the network behind Absolute Poker and Ultimate Bet, Sirius. They were the undisputed kings.
They were. But while this online empire was booming, you could feel the ground starting to shift, legally speaking, in the U.S. In 2006, Congress passed something called the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, UIGA for short. Think of it as a potential seismic shift in the rules.
Okay, UIGA, let's break that down a bit. What did it actually do? Essentially, it made it a federal crime for gambling businesses to knowingly accept payments related to unlawful internet gambling.
Right, and the penalties were serious, talking up to 5 years in prison. But here's the crucial part, the real twist in the tale, as you said earlier.
What was that?
The law didn't clearly define what unlawful gambling actually meant. I mean, beyond pointing specifically to sports betting, which was already kind of covered by the older Wire Act, this vagueness, this lack of clarity, it became the absolute crux of the whole legal battle that followed.
So it created a gray area.
A huge gray area. And you saw different reactions. Some big players, like Party Poker, they looked at UIGA and decided, nope, too risky. They pulled out of the U.S. market immediately, folded their hand, basically.
They did. But others, notably PokerStars and Full Tilt, they made a different calculation. They decided to stay. Their argument, their belief, was that UIGA didn't actually apply to poker.
Exactly. They argued poker was a game of skill, not purely chance, and therefore wasn't covered by the law's definition of unlawful gambling. It was a bold stance. They were essentially saying to the government, we think you're bluffing, or at least the law doesn't cover us.
So they kept operating in the U.S. for several more years.
Yes, they did. Their gamble continued. Then fast forward to 2010. A seemingly unrelated event happens, but it turns out to be the domino that starts everything falling. A name to remember. Daniel Sethkoff.
Okay, who was he?
He ran a company, a big one, that processed payments for these online poker sites, kind of the financial plumbing behind the scenes. And he gets arrested, very serious charges.
Yeah.
Money laundering, bank fraud, wire fraud. The works.
Ouch. That's a bad beat. So facing a potentially long prison sentence.
Right. Reports suggest Stetkoff decided to cooperate with the authorities, became a state witness. And the information he apparently provided, well, it was like finding the missing piece of the puzzle for the prosecutors.
What did he tell them?
The indictment that came later alleged that these big poker sites weren't just processing payments directly. No, they were allegedly miscoding transactions, disguising them, routing them through various banks, including one specifically named Sunfirst Bank in Utah, basically trying to sneak the money past the UIGA restrictions.
Ah, so they were accused of actively trying to circumvent the law they argued didn't apply to them.
That was the allegation, yes.
Sure.
Trying to hide the nature of the transactions from the banks and the payment systems.
So all of this is building up. The legal ambiguity, the continued operation, the payment processor arrest. The stage is set for the day everything came crashing down, April 15th, 2011. A date anyone involved in online poker will never, ever forget. Black Friday.
That's the day. The U.S. Department of Justice unsealed criminal indictments. Not civil suits, criminal indictments
Right.
against the founders, the top executives of the big three, PokerStars, Full Tilt Poker, and Sirius. And the charges were those heavy hitters we mentioned, violating UIGEA, bank fraud, money laundering.
And it wasn't just legal papers being filed, was it? There was immediate visible action.
Oh, yeah. Simultaneously, the DOJ seized the .com domain names, PokerStars.com, FullTiltPoker.com, AbsolutePoker.com, UltimateBet.com. If you try to go to those sites in the U.S., boom, you got a takedown notice from the FBI and the DOJ. It was like the digital doors were just slammed shut and locked.
Okay.
Gone.
Instantly.
PokerStars and Full Tilt, the two biggest by far, immediately stopped offering any real money games to their U.S. customers. For countless players, their hobby, their community, and for some, their actual profession,
Yeah.
it just vanished overnight.
And the money. What about the player funds?
Huge issue. Around 76 bank accounts, spread across 14 different countries, were frozen. This locked up player funds. It's hard to get an exact number, but a conservative estimate put the total player deposits just on Full Tilt and PokerStars at around $500 million.
$500 million. Just frozen. Imagine waking up to that news. Your online bankroll, maybe your life savings for some people, completely inaccessible.
Devastating. And the government wasn't messing around. Prosecutors were seeking serious prison time for 11 key individuals named in the indictments. And they were going after a massive $3 billion in forfeitures from the companies themselves. It was a clear signal. The party's over.
But then something really interesting happened just days later, right? Something involving PokerStars' website.
Yes, that's a crucial detail and often gets glossed over. Just 5 days after seizing the domains, the U.S. Attorney's Office actually gave PokerStars.com back to the company. But specifically for one reason: to allow U.S. players to cash out their balances.
So they shut down the playing, but facilitated getting the players' money back, at least for PokerStars.
It seems that way, yes. It suggests that even amidst this massive crackdown on the companies, there was some effort, at least in PokerStars' case, to protect the individual players and their funds. It wasn't just a blanket seizure affecting everyone indiscriminately.
Still, the reaction from the poker world must have been intense.
Oh, absolutely. Shock, anger, confusion, fear. You name it. You had pros whose entire livelihood disappeared in an instant. You had casual players with significant sums stuck. Some reports mentioned individuals with millions locked up in their accounts.
Millions. Wow.
Yeah. The Poker Players Alliance, which is like a lobbying group for poker players, went into overdrive. They urged everyone affected to contact their congressmen, make noise, demand answers.
And it wasn't just players, right? I remember even some politicians weighing in.
You're right. Then Congressman Barney Frank, who was known to be a poker player himself, publicly questioned the DOJ's priorities. He basically asked why they were focusing so intensely on online poker when, the country was still reeling from the 2008 financial crisis caused by major banks. It definitely put the crackdown at a different perspective for some.
And the fallout went beyond just the players and the sites. It hit the whole ecosystem.
Totally. Think about all those poker TV shows that were suddenly popular. Many of them relied heavily on advertising money from PokerStars and Full Tilt. When that revenue dried up overnight, a lot of those shows just got canceled. Even ESPN had a big ad deal with PokerStars, and they had to pull the plug on that.
Right. And the World Series of Poker that year, 2011, just a few months after Black Friday,
saw a record percentage of foreign players. Why? Because so many American players who usually qualified through online satellite tournaments on sites like PokerStars couldn't play anymore, couldn't win their seats. It literally changed the demographics of the biggest poker tournament in the world. And as we said, for any American playing poker online professionally, their career evaporated, just gone.
Did this cause ripples internationally as well?
It did. Antigua and Barbuda, for example. Online gaming was a pretty big part of their economy.
Right.
They started making noises about taking the U.S. to the World Trade Organization. They argued the crackdown violated international trade agreements, and I actually had history here. They'd won a similar WTO case against the U.S. before regarding offshore gambling sites.
Interesting. And what about the regulators in other countries where these sites were licensed?
Good question. The Alderney Gambling Control Commission, based in the Channel Islands, had licensed Full Tilt Poker. After Black Friday, they investigated, suspended Full Tilt's license, and eventually revoked it entirely. That was basically the nail in the coffin for Full Tilt operations worldwide at that point.
Okay, so it's a massive mess. Indictments, frozen funds, sites shut down, international incidents. How did this eventually get resolved? Or did it?
It did eventually. It took time. In July 2012, about 15 months after Black Friday, the U.S. government reached a settlement. This was primarily with PokerStars and Full Tilt. The key thing was that the civil complaints against them were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they couldn't be refiled. And importantly, as part of the settlement, neither company admitted any wrongdoing.
No admission of guilt, but a settlement. And wasn't there something unusual about that settlement, something involving the two rivals?
Yes, this is where it gets really unique, almost a fun fact if you can call it that in this context. As part of the deal, PokerStars actually acquired the assets of their biggest competitor, Full Tilt Poker.
PokerStars bought Full Tilt after all that.
Bought their assets, yeah. But here's the truly remarkable part, the bit that really stands out and came up later. When the founder of PokerStars, Scheinberg, was eventually sentenced years later in 2020.
Right, he was one of the indicted individuals.
He was. The judge acknowledged the illegal operations, the wrongdoing. But the judge also specifically highlighted PokerStars' actions after Black Friday as incredibly responsible.
What did they do?
PokerStars didn't just make their own players whole, which they were allowed to do after getting their domain back. They voluntarily stepped in and used funds from the settlement, and potentially their own money. It gets complex to pay back all the players who had money stuck on Full Tilt Poker, and even players on the Absolute Poker Ultimate Bet Network.
Wait, they paid the debts of their rivals to the players.
Essentially, yes. They took on the massive liability of making sure players from Full Tilt and APB got their frozen balances back. Billions of dollars repaid to players worldwide. This act of, frankly, extraordinary good faith and corporate responsibility towards the entire player community was a major factor in Scheinberg receiving a relatively lenient sentence, just a fine, no jail time.
That's actually incredible. A company indicted by the government steps up to bail out the customers of its bankrupt competitors. You don't hear that every day.
You really don't. It's a standout moment in the whole saga. Now, that doesn't mean everyone walked away free. The criminal indictments did lead to convictions for others involved, people associated with payment processing like Ira Rubin, executives at SunFirst Bank like John Campos, even one of the Absolute Poker founders, Brent Buckley. They received sentences ranging from probation to actual prison time.
So there were consequences, but the PokerStars resolution was unique.
Mineral message.
Just jumping in quickly here, this is Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast. If you're as gripped by this deep dive into online poker's Black Friday as we are, and you want to make sure you don't miss out on more fascinating stories like this, please take a second, hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening. It really helps us bring you more explorations like this one.
Okay, so we've traced the rise, the fall, the legal battles, the surprising resolution. What does it all mean when we step back? Black Friday wasn't just, a single bad day for poker players. It was really this dramatic collision, a collision between a super fast-growing digital industry and the often slower, sometimes ambiguous legal frameworks trying to govern it.
Yeah, it really threw into sharp relief how tricky it is to regulate things that happen online, crossing borders, moving at the speed of the internet. And it showed the immense power government action can have, not just on big companies, but on the lives of ordinary people and the very structure of these digital ecosystems. Absolutely. And like you highlighted, that unexpected twist with PokerStars stepping up to ensure players across the board were made whole. It adds this complex layer. It shows a degree of corporate responsibility, maybe even community focus, emerging right in the middle of all that legal turmoil. It wasn't just about the bottom line at that point.
It definitely wasn't. So this whole deep dive into Black Friday, it really leaves us, and hopefully you, with a big question to chew on. In our world today, which is becoming more digital by the second, how do we find the right balance? The balance between encouraging innovation, letting new technologies and industries flourish.
And implementing effective government regulation to manage the risks, protect consumers, and uphold the law. What happens when those two powerful forces inevitably clash?
What are the long-term consequences? It's something we're still grappling with in so many areas, isn't it?
It really is. It's a constant negotiation. And events like Black Friday, well, they offer some pretty stark lessons.
Thank you so much for joining us on Tell Me More Stories Told As podcast for this adventure into online poker's history. We hope it's given you maybe a new angle, a fresh perspective on what was a truly pivotal moment. Until our next deep dive, keep asking questions and keep exploring the stories all around you.